In the beginning, Jesus created the heavens and the earth. By him, through him, and to him, in the beginning, all things emerged. In the beginning, he built the physical world into which he would eventually come. In the beginning, he formed the flesh he would eventually become. He designed the air in the beginning on which his lungs would eventually rely. In the beginning, he constructed the tree on which he would hang and eventually die. For when God spoke and the universe sprung to life, in the beginning, he made a promise to save the world by becoming Jesus the Christ. And we know this because it is right in the beginning of our Bibles, in the first story we face. For the book of Genesis demonstrates how God can take all the evil we create and make something good. And he does so not because he has to, or even because he should, but because he made a gracious promise that he would. In the beginning, we see the meaning of why God created the earth and everything in it. It's that we might enjoy his presence, expand his garden, and cover the world as his image. So to that end, God gave human beings the privilege of being a part of that mission. He enlisted Adam and Eve to care for the earth and to have children, to be fruitful and multiply until everyone that would come from their family line turned the whole earth into a garden temple where humans could live side by side with the divine. But for Adam and Eve, something else came to mind. Instead of enjoying God and his provision, they sought out a counterfeit. Instead of expanding the garden, they sought to conquer it. Instead of spreading the image of God, they sought out their own prominence. God gave them the reason for their existence, and they did the exact opposite. All they were left with was shame, where they used to be free. Guilt, where there used to be peace, and fear, where there used to be ease. So instead of being with God in his garden temple, they would be removed from him. For they sought out life apart from the one who gave them breath. They thought they were gaining something by their deeds, but all they earned was death. Death for their bodies, loss of their purpose, the end of their paradise, the destruction of their innocence. But the worst part of all of it, the punishment's deepest depth, is that they would be cut off from the author of life. That is the worst possible death. But God's plan was not altered or disrupted. His purposes were not laid to rest. Instead, he would work through the worst humans could do to show us his best. For what we see after Adam and Eve commit the first sin at the garden tree is that God makes them a guarantee that he would set humanity free from the curse of death that would divide us. From Adam and Eve's offspring, he would provide us with a new seed, a new Adam, one who was righteous, who would unmake death, remake his world, and reconcile us. Genesis demonstrates how God can take all the evil we create and make something good. And he does so not because he has to, or even because he should, but because he made a gracious promise that he would. This promise of a new seed was made to a specific people of a specific line, which Genesis goes to great lengths to trace and define. But in Eve's first seed, we do not find life, but death. We don't see a sun crushing sin, but dying under it. So even though Eve had given birth to new offspring, God's promise of his final seed would not be fulfilled yet. Instead, God would give them another son named Seth, who would be the next in line to bear the promise. But just like Adam and Eve, and just like Cain and Abel, God's promised seed would be carried by imperfect people who continually commit evil. Noah escaped the flood, but committed shameful acts while intoxicated. Sarah was promised a chosen child, but gave Abraham to another when her doubts were escalated. Isaac was told to bless his younger son, but tried to make it so the older was the one consecrated. Jacob was given God's blessing, but constantly tricked, lied, and manipulated. And by the time we get to Joseph, at the end of Genesis, Adam and Eve's family tree is filled with so much brokenness, so much death, so much hopelessness, that we start to wonder if anyone will fulfill God's promises, if anyone will be the promised seed, or if there would ever be someone who could. But Genesis demonstrates how God can take all the evil we create and make something good. And he does so not because he has to, or even because he should, but because he made a gracious promise that he would. Which is why the book of Genesis points to a future descendant, one who would keep the promise, one who would take all that was wrong and make it right. For the very word who in the beginning spoke and there was light was born as the promised seed of Genesis, as Jesus the Christ. He would bring the whole world life, but not like Adam and Eve, who tried to earn life by taking something off a tree. Instead, he would put his own life on one to take the death that humanity brought on. For in the beginning, when Jesus built the world, formed the flesh, and constructed the very idea of trees, he was crafting the very piece of wood on which he would suffer loss. In the beginning, Jesus promised to conquer death by putting himself on a cross. But what's different about his death than the death earned in the Garden of Eden is that when Jesus died, death could not keep him. Since he did not sin like Adam, the grave had no claim and therefore had to release him. So now all nations can escape the curse, beat death, and be back with God in Eden. So just as in Genesis, the cross of Jesus demonstrates how God can take all the evil we create and make something good. And he does so not because he has to, or even because he should, but because he made a gracious promise that he would.